Welcome back, everyone, to the IPMA and PMI joint podcast. In fact, for PMI, we call this PM Untold. Today, we'll be talking with Jaap more about the topic of steering committees, sometimes called steercos, boards, project boards, and so on. The reason because project managers need to understand how these bodies work. And if you're on a steering committee, you definitely want to know how they work because it's part of your success story. So welcome, Jaap. Happy to have you back for our fourth session.
Thank you. Nice.
Now, we've already talked about a few things related to steering committees, what they are, how they work in general. But now let's get into something really detailed that we need clarity on, which is how steering committees work in terms of their individual roles and responsibilities. They do work collectively, but the individuals of the steering committee may all have a different point of view, a different level of responsibility, and in fact, a different constituency that they're supporting, right?
Yeah.
So tell us, why are roles and responsibilities so important?
Well, a committee is a group of people, but it's not that they are all the same people with the same competences and the same interests and the same responsibilities. So first, have a look at roles. Roles can be used for two reasons. One, it can be used to select a member. So, I need a role who's responsible, let's say, for the look and feel of the end product, if it's something, let's say, with IT or a new website. In Prince2, it's called a senior user. So we need somebody to represent this. A second reason for a role is that it can be a starting point for individual responsibilities. What I saw, it's always important to really explicitly say, I am a member of this steering committee. These are my responsibilities in this steering committee. It's not just a general role, it's also I am responsible, let's say, for a user interface, user interaction, for this process or for this department, for this company, and also share it with the other members. And then this selection of the individual responsibilities is really important for a lot of reasons. One of them is quite obvious, that no tasks are forgotten. I have an example where the project manager and the project owner said, well, this steering committee member really had some issues because he did not do the communication in this department. But then he said, yeah, but I'm only here because of this department, the biggest one, and not of the others. So they really didn't discuss it up front. A second one is for accountability. So if you know your individual responsibilities, you can be held accountable and also you feel more accountable, which is really good for project success. A third one we know from research on management teams is that it helps prevent tension, which might seem a bit strange, but if I know why you are here, what your responsibilities are, and you disagree with me for some reason, I understand it better, because you have different responsibilities than I have. And the last one, it might help prevent groupthink, which is also an issue in groups like a steering committee. So roles is for selection and to determine the individual responsibilities as a starting point, but they're not good enough for that, not only.
Yeah, in past podcasts, you've talked about the importance of no surprises, and this is just another form of no surprises, right? We all know why we're here and what our role is, and I think that is very important. In my almost 40 years of project managing, I can say that that's a big one. And so kind of related to that, what are the different kinds of roles a steering committee might typically expect to see?
Yeah, what I see people, if they use roles, they use the ones from the project management methodology Prince2. Even for projects where it's not a standard, like often in civil engineering projects. In Prince2, you have three roles. You have the project owner, which is they're called executive. You have the senior user, who represent user groups, but the user can also be a director of a production plant, for example, which is also a user in Prince2. And you can be a representative of suppliers. I found in my research that one can be improved. I agree with the one on project owner. I partly agree with the one on representing of user groups because I think it should be split to avoid confusion. What I see there are user groups which will use the end product you will deliver as a project. But in Prince 2, if you then maintain that product, then you're also a senior user. And that gives a lot of confusion because several of the people I spoke to thought they were suppliers. But the interest is really different because in Prince 2, if you are a supplier, you are a supplier in the project phase and not a supplier afterwards. Yeah, you could be both, but it's a different role. So I suggest to have those 4 roles instead of 3. And I see in practice also a role of quality assurance towards the steering committee. According to Prince 2, these people should not be there, who have only this role. But still it happens, and there are also some nice case studies also in scientific literature where there is a positive result to get somebody from outside with, for example, a network, like is common in non-executive boards. It's possible there. It also has a pitfall because you might be then in the steering committee without any really accountability for a certain area. So you just advise and you might also take over the work of the project manager. So be a bit careful with that 5th role, but I've seen some good examples of that.
And does that include in the Prince model the run and operate? Because the issue is you might be doing the project, but then you actually might transfer over, even from one hand to the other, you could say of the same person or the same organization, to run and operate that final product. And are you saying that the supplier could wear either one of those hats or both of them in terms of who the supplier is in that organizational structure?
Exactly. That's why I think we should split this role.
Okay.
And still it could be one person holding several roles. That's the case with all the roles. But the responsibilities for the person, the organization doing the maintenance, like in a production plant or infrastructure or IT or whatever, that's a really different one from the supplier towards the project, which in Prince 2 is not part of the senior supplier role. That's the senior supplier, but the maintenance is a senior user. But in practice, it's not really a user, it's somebody providing maintenance so that the products delivered by the project will still be useful a few years later.
Right. That all goes back to no surprises, that you're clear about what hat that person's wearing or what role they're choosing to play at that moment of decision making.
Exactly, because like I said, this is only a starting point. It's much more important to use this to know what is really my individual responsibilities, for which process, department, or whatever.
I can see a possibility for a conflict of interest in that sort of double hatting. So the question is, should a vendor or a supplier actually be part of the steering committee?
Yeah. Well, first, the potential conflict of interest. Most steering committee members will have conflicts of interest. I can guarantee that.
That's true.
If I ask people, should the supplier, and then I'm talking about an external supplier, so not like an IT director on behalf of suppliers, really be part of the steering committee? Then most people in civil engineering and in building say, no, not at all. We have a contract manager for that. That would not be good because then they will talk about money and getting more for their contracts. While in IT, it's much more common to do that. And Prince 2 is even, they're not saying it should be, suggesting that it's a good option. And they also found some examples in civil engineering where it did help. So I can say there is a heated debate about it. I didn't really research it, but my personal thoughts are that you should do it only if the amount of trust is high enough. Yeah? So if you're talking about a topic and then you know there will be some extra work for the supplier, they're not going to use this against you as an organization. And I think also you should only do it if there's quite some innovation involved. So if it's really something you can do with a contract and then change a contract, leave them out, make a separate contract authority for that or something like that.
Yeah, I would also think that there's a difference between a transactional relationship with a supplier and a strategic relationship with a supplier. And if they're not strategic, they shouldn't be part of the party to the decision making because they're basically in that just money action kind of transactional. So you want to have the right intention, don't you, in terms of behind the role, because they will have a conflict, of course, but they should have the best interest of the organization, the project, and the result in mind. When
strategic might also be a good word. I discussed with somebody a big mega project in civil engineering, and there they made after big troubles, they made the supplier, the external suppliers, the contractors, more important. Also, there were 3 steering committees there, 3 levels. Even in the steering committee, also in decision making, because in the end, the project was not really going well. It was in a newspaper with a lot of issues, so the public opinion was against them. But also that was not good for the supplier, and also, people working on the project, even from a supplier, they want to be proud of what they're doing.
Of course.
So it helped there. I also saw in one of my own projects that you had a steering committee, I think with about 8 members, and 4 of them were from external suppliers. But that was really not as it should be.
Right, that shifts the balance of power a little bit, doesn't it, to something external. Well, that's good food for thought. Now what you would kind of see, kind of related to that, about how many different kinds of people should you have on a project steering committee, is how to balance those individual responsibilities with the group needing to work together, because that's kind of that group you just talked about. They didn't have the right balance of power. So how do you manage that balance?
I asked a lot of people, which I interviewed about steering committees, should the members focus on the common goals or should they focus on the individual responsibilities? Which in itself, of course, is a difficult question. And then, of course, I asked them why. The idea I have is that people saying you should focus on the shared goals don't have shared goals yet, or there's not enough mutual trust. And then if there is a certain degree of mutual trust between the members of the steering committee, and there is a certain amount of shared goals, the people won't agree on all the kind of sub-goals, but at least the general idea where the project should go, what it should deliver, then it's good to focus on the personal responsibilities for the reasons we just saw. No things forgotten. The decision making is much better because you get all kinds of viewpoints instead of, oh yeah, we all agree and we just continue without really thinking through what is the consequence of the decision or what you should do for your responsibilities in the permanent organization. So, and now at the moment I'm in my 3rd study and I'm testing this hypothesis. The results are a bit mixed, but still the idea that I have is that it's important to focus on personal responsibilities. So it's like you said several times also that it's clear who is responsible for what, who will do what, because a steering committee is not just only making decisions, but also doing something with that decision.
That's a really good point. So what are your final takeaways?
Yeah, like don't just start. So if you have a steering committee and the members start, like I said in one of the previous podcasts, don't assume they all know what their roles and responsibilities are. Don't assume they know what the goals are. They will agree on the general goals, probably, but not on what it means for their responsibilities. So you should take some time for that, not only to discuss what are your responsibilities, but also what could I expect of you, but you don't think that's your responsibility, so somebody else should do it.
Would you almost think that steering committees or boards, project boards, have the word project in them, and projects have kickoffs?
Yeah.
So would you not expect that a steerco would have a kickoff in some kind of way?
Yeah, often they do, by the way, but then it's about 5 minutes with some roles.
Yeah.
And then it's 10 minutes about the goal, and then it's something about the project team and the amount of meetings. That's the negative part, but it should be much more. It should also be about how will the decision making be and so on. But also about personal responsibilities. How do we work together? What can we expect of each other? But yeah, like a kickoff, it won't help with the mutual trust. You could also do it via different means. Sometimes it might already be there. Perhaps people don't know each other. You could organize, let's say, site visits. That also really helps, especially if you have a physical product.
Yeah, you kind of create a common goal and empathy for that common goal. That sort of brings the team together. That balances those two things you just talked about.
Combined with a lunch and so on, all the standard things you would do in your project team.
Right, building that trust. You know, one of the things that you've really talked about today is about the core responsibilities and roles people have and clarity on that. But, you know, I'm really excited about our next podcast because you're going to unravel something I find very important, which is what are the competencies of the people who are going to be on the steering committee, and how does that impact that steering committee? You know, Just because you can doesn't mean you should be on a steering committee. A lot of people like the idea of, I'm on a steering committee, I have power. But what happens when they don't have the right competencies or capabilities, or even, as you say, the network and other kinds of skill sets they need in order to be effective and efficient members of a steering committee? We're going to cover that next, right?
Yeah.
So you'll be finding out more on our next episode, on the 5th episode of this podcast, joining Jaap to talk next about competencies. How do you make sure the steering committee's got the right stuff? And if you want to know more about that or any of the other topics that Jaap has covered in this series, be sure to subscribe. And we'll see you next time on PMI and IPMA's podcast. Bye-bye, everybody.